In a world where God is dying, four heathens come to deliver the final nails in the coffin. From the depths of hell, Satan sends four puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists from the Middle East.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Secular Jihadists. My name is Yasmin Mohammed, and with me today is Armin Nevabi, who is the leader of the Atheist Republic. Missing today are two other jihadis, Ali Rizvi, who is the author of The Atheist Muslim, and Faisal Saeed Al-Mutar, who is the CEO of Ideas Beyond Borders.
It's my fault, by the way, because
That's okay. That's all right. We won't point fingers, but it was Armin's fault. And we have a special guest with us tonight. Our guest is Lloyd Evans. Lloyd Evans is an ex-Jehovah's Witness who had a YouTube channel under the name John Cedars when he was covertly talking about the Jehovah's Witness religion when he was still a part of it. So much like the plight of ex-Muslims, he had to keep his identity hidden. So that's why his page is called the John Cedars channel on YouTube. So you can look him up there and get lots more information about him. But today we're going to mostly be talking about the parallels between Islam and Jehovah's Witnesses. So welcome to the show, Lloyd.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
And we're very excited that you would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning for us. So thank you very much. We appreciate that.
It's an honor, so I'm happy to do that.
Good, thanks. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about how you fell into this religion / cult / organization?
Well, like many Jehovah's Witnesses, I was born into it. And I think in many ways, that's kind of increasingly how you have to be introduced to the religion, because the religion itself makes sense if you're explaining it to an adult. But of course, when you're born into it, you don't really, you don't have the critical thinking skills as a child to ask all these questions. So, my parents took it extremely seriously and trained me to take it very seriously. So from a very young age, I was expecting Armageddon to come at any moment.
And you grew up in the UK, correct?
I did, yeah. I grew up just south of Manchester, in a small town called Wilmslow. And yeah, that was my experience growing up as a Jehovah's Witness.
Was there a pretty large Jehovah's Witness community around you?
Yeah, and that's one thing with the witnesses is that, especially in kind of Western English-speaking countries, they're quite popular. I think there's currently about 1 million Jehovah's Witnesses in America. It's maybe a couple 100,000 in the United Kingdom, but that translates to maybe a congregation in every major town and several congregations if it's a larger city. So yeah, there were lots of Jehovah's Witnesses around us, and most of my friends, but I didn't really hang out with the kids at school socially. When it came to playing together and going on vacations together, it was always with other Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. So did you go to a public school then?
I did, yes.
And so you weren't encouraged to bring non-Jehovah's Witness friends home to play with you, and you weren't encouraged to go to their homes?
When I was younger, so when I was in, we call it primary school in the UK, I would bring school friends home. But as we got older, one kind of phrase that witnesses use is bad association. So they will point to anybody who's quote unquote worldly and say, well, this is a worldly person. And when you're in primary school, because your school friend is very young, it's less of an issue. But the older you get, and the more people's personalities develop, the more you do single out, or you're trained to single out people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses as being worldly. So that kind of divide becomes more pronounced the older you get. So certainly in high school, I wouldn't be bringing people back home or socializing with them.
Now, I saw some Jehovah's Witness propaganda online where they were encouraging little kids to talk to their worldly friends about Jehovah and how much he loves us, et cetera, et cetera. So was that the kind of thing? Did they have you doing missionary work as well?
Yeah, that's one of the more distasteful aspects of the religion, is that it encourages school acts like a territory, evangelical territory. So you don't just go to school to learn, school to preach to your classmates and or your teacher. So it wasn't uncommon for me to head to school with some publications in my school bag and to actually try and offer these publications to schoolmates that I was closer to, as it were. And I even remember leaving books with one or two school children. But that's just the attitude I was trained to have, was that you don't just go to school to learn, you go to school to pursue the opportunity that's been given to you to preach to your classmates.
And did you convert anybody?
Amazingly, no. But that's kind of a whole other issue, because throughout my entire life, and I spent ridiculous amounts of time attempting to convert other people.
So you really believed it. So you were a true believer.
Well, yeah, I was what's called a pioneer. So your average Jehovah's Witness will spend, let's say, around 10 hours a month in the kind of door knocking, standing by carts activity. If you're a regular pioneer, you'll spend 70 hours per month. And for about 9 years, that's exactly what I did. I spent 70 hours, or attempted to spend 70 hours, because I wasn't always successful. But that was the goal. And in all of that time, I'm very, very proud to say that I never persuaded anyone that I met in that preaching work to become a witness. And it's only when you wake up that you realize why that is. And it's because the internet's completely full of information that debunks Jehovah's Witness beliefs. But when you're doing it, you're thinking, why can't people get it? It's so clear.
I'm so convincing.
Exactly.
But I've been trying to talk to a lot of them in the street, Jehovah's Witnesses. Most of them are not really trying. Most of them are like, why is this person talking to me? And like, isn't that the point of you standing here?
People usually just ignore them. So
right, like, yeah, they're just standing there with their books, and you go ask them questions, and they're like shocked and terrified, and they want you to go away. Like, wait, if you don't want me to talk to you, why are you even here? But
well, yeah, you have to bear in mind that the cart witness thing is still a fairly new initiative. Right. So it's actually, I never stood by a cart as a Jehovah's Witness, because the whole thing was introduced in around 2012.
I'm sorry, can I pause you for 1 second? Can you please explain the term cart witnessing?
Oh, good.
So cart witnessing is standing by a literature cart. You know, when
you're just standing on a corner of a street or something.
Exactly. When you see witnesses,
their booklets.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see witnesses stood on the corner of a street with their books on the rack,
mm-hmm.
that's kind of the colloquialism is cart witnessing. And I never did that, because that was introduced in 2012, and I started waking up in 2010, and by 2011 I was an activist. So I just missed that. But
how did it spread so fast? Because this is, this new thing that they do it exactly the same everywhere. It is so similar that, I went, like in Vancouver, I see them. In Italy, I saw them. In France, I saw them. In Philippines, I saw them. And from a mile away, you could tell, Jehovah's Witness, without even talking to them. Because they have the exact same cards with the exact same booklet, and they're standing in the two of them in the exact same way.
Even though it's the exact same clothes.
Yeah, the exact same clothes. Like, they're like, it's the same everywhere in the world, and they're like spread so fast. And their churches look exactly the same thing, with that, Kingdom Hall thing in the curved way. Like, everything looks exactly the same.
Well, that's because it's a unified global cult. and they roll things out in such a way that where everybody does things the same. That's kind of how it works. So
That sounds like Islam somewhat. That's why everybody thinks all Muslims are Arab.
Sure, but going back to your point about them not really wanting to engage with you, I can fully imagine why that is, and that's because it's still a fairly new thing. And if I'd have been given that opportunity to do car witnessing when I was a witness, I would have viewed it as, well, here's kind of like a chance for me to take some time off and to mentally disengage, because I can now just stand next to this thing where there's some books, and if people want the books, they can take them, and hopefully they won't ask me any questions, because I will really, really struggle, probably depending on what the question is. Usually when a witness is going door knocking, they already have their presentation planned, right, and they get to dictate the conversation. But when a complete stranger approaches them out of nowhere and fires a question at them, well, you're not necessarily prepared for that.
Right.
So it's something that witnesses, I think, are still to some degree trying to come to terms with.
Yeah, I invite one of them that was pretty serious. I invited them to our home. Yes, the video is unlisted, but it's not private, so our patrons are going to be able to.
Okay, sorry. All right.
I invited one of them to our home, and this guy was pretty serious, and he came every week to my place for about 6 months. And every time he had a new person to train on me, show him how it's done. But he failed, and after that, I kept on calling them to send somebody else, but they had blacklisted me. They would not come. They would not send anybody to come see me.
You must have failed spectacularly to become a Jehovah's Witness, obviously.
No, but I didn't, because I think these people are very aggressive at sending people. I think I might have converted some of their because he was.
Maybe that's what happened.
Yeah, I think the people that he was bringing as trainees were doubting, because that's why they weren't bringing anybody to my house anymore.
Well, you have to remember that in their mind, they are counting their time when they're coming to see you. So literally every minute that goes by that they're talking to you, that's actually getting written down on a piece of paper at the end of the month. So they view you as an opportunity to, at least we don't have to stand on the street corner, or we don't have to knock on doors. We can be in this guy's apartment and we can be preaching to him. Yeah. And by the way, we're going to...
And anything is better than staying outside.
Precisely. And we're going to write him down as a return visit. That's another thing that witnesses do. So when they call back on people, it's classed as a return visit. So they'll record that as well. If they feel as though they're studying the Bible with you, they'll record you as being a Bible study. So that's another bonus that they get. Oh, well, we did a Bible study today.
No, it's very true. Every time we came, can we read the Bible? And I'm like, no, you first have to prove.
So you were a Bible study then?
Yeah, you have to first prove me why I shouldn't take that seriously before we even open that thing. But they kept on saying, no, we have to open the Bible.
It sounds like you were a Bible study. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, John, tell us about, John, I'm reading John there. Lloyd, tell us about your experiences when you were visiting people for those 70 hours a week for however many years. Were people generally just shutting their doors? Were they, tell us about your experiences.
Well, the vast majority, it's such an unnatural thing, isn't it, to call on a complete stranger and ask for a conversation about something as deeply personal as one's religious beliefs. The overwhelming majority of people I did that with, well, first of all, many of them weren't home because I was calling during the day when they were invariably at work. But the ones that were at home invariably weren't interested. You still do get a small percentage who are, for whatever reason, perhaps they just don't want to appear rude. They'll maybe take the literature that you're offering, or they'll maybe even engage in a small conversation. And if you're very lucky, you'll call again in a week to 2 weeks. I did it 2 weeks, but you're actually encouraged to do it on a weekly basis. And they'll keep taking the literature from you, in which case, again, you've got something that you can report down and say, well, I made this return visit and I returned and I placed these magazines, and all of that goes towards your kind of almost spiritual bank account, because you're literally writing all these records down and it's all going on your report card, so that in a few months, when the elders kind of look at how well you're doing, they can say, oh yes, Lloyd had this many return visits and this many magazine placements. It's that well coordinated.
And do those elders ever sit down and try to figure out, like, is this effective? Are people actually converting?
That gets done at a higher level. So the elders pass that information on up to the branch, and the branch passes all of the accumulated statistics on up to the governing body and to the headquarters. And I guess they decide whether things are effective or not. But the easiest way of telling how effective things are is to look at the worldwide statistics that get published by Watchtower. And what you find is that the number of hours witnesses are investing in the preaching work is going up and up and up and up. But the hours to baptism ratio, in other words, how many hours does it take per baptism that we're reporting, that also is increasing. So it's taking more and more time for, I think it was, when I first started tracking it, it was something like 9 months of solid time for one baptism. And if you think about it, 9 months, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week of solid evangelism to produce one convert. And since then, it's gone up to, 10, 11 months. It's increasing all the time. And that tells me that the preaching work essentially isn't an effective way of making people Jehovah's Witnesses.
So two questions. Why would they even do this, given that, correct me if I'm wrong, they believe that only 144,000 people are going to go to heaven, right? Is that the number?
Yes.
And so the more people that you convert, the lower your chances become, right? So why would they even want to convert people? Second of all, if the motivations is, financial, right? Given that these people are doing it for free, does it really matter how much it takes? Like, when you're a member, do you have to pay? Do you pay the church a portion of your income? Is that the motivation?
That's the Mormons.
That's Mormons. So what's the
Scientologists?
So what's the motivation behind actually increasing? Is it a sign of loyalty? Like, is it more about the person doing the conversion rather than the target of the conversion? Is that what it is?
Yeah, I'll take the second question first. The preaching work, I like to think of it as more of like a token display of loyalty and kind of an act of worship, rather than something that they, obviously they to some extent rely on it for making new converts. It's going to produce some, but first and foremost, it's something that witnesses can do to prove how seriously they take the religion, and to prove how close their relationship with Jehovah is. In terms of the 144,000, this is one of the areas in which Jehovah's Witness theology is unique from that of other branches of Christianity. They essentially have what I refer to as two-tier Christianity, so that the 144,000 are classed as every Christian who has ever lived, going all the way back to Jesus' apostles, and they're the ones who go to heaven and preside over the earth. They rule over the earth as kings and priests. And when Jehovah's Witnesses go into their preaching work, first and foremost, they're trying to find the people who will live on the earth. And that can be, an unlimited almost number of people. So basically, when Armageddon comes, everyone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness is going to be massacred. And the ones who survive are going to be the Jehovah's Witnesses. And then once Armageddon's passed, it will be down to them to basically terraform the planet into a global paradise over which the 144,000 will rule.
Okay. So, but these other people will never go to heaven. They just make the world a better place. Is that what they're going to do?
They live forever. They live forever on the earth.
On this earth.
And there's no more death.
There's no more death.
You should become a Jehovah's Witness. It's fantastic. You get to play with animals, and there's a fruit-based economy. There's tables of fruit everywhere. It's fantastic. The only problem is that there are 7 billion dead bodies underneath the lawn. But as long as you can forget about that, it's a fantastic place.
But there's no hell, right? There's no hell in Jehovah's Witnesses. No
hell, no. So that was actually one of the earliest kind of teachings that set witnesses apart from other religions. Was they said, well, hell there's no scriptures that necessarily describe eternal torment. The scriptures regarding hell.
It mentions.
Yeah, they say, well, that's just a symbol for eternal destruction. You know, God would never purposefully torment someone forever. So they kind of invent a God that they like and ascribe him.
People that go to heaven, people that stay on earth forever and stay alive, and then there's the non-Jehovah's Witnesses which die and
who just die. Your job is to get out of the way, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's no hell, and there's no cross apparently. No
cross. No. There used to be, again, going far enough back in witness teachings, they used to have like a little badge with a cross and a crown. That was back when they called themselves Bible students.
But they think Jesus didn't die on a cross. He died on a pole like this, right?
On an upright pole, yeah.
So where did I getting that from? Didn't Jesus say, whoever bears my cross is like, he didn't specifically mention that in the Bible.
I think the Greek word is stauros, and whoever bears my stauros, and they say, well, that means an upright tree. So that's probably what Jesus was impaled on, was an actual stake rather than a cross. They view the
Romans to crucify people. Wasn't that the thing to do?
Yeah, it's another area in which I think they're just trying to be awkward, but they just insist that the cross shape is something that was basically a pagan symbol that was kind of infected into Christianity, and not necessarily what Jesus actually died on. So they think it's all this huge conspiracy, so that Satan kind of put this cross image into Christianity down through the centuries to try and pervert it into worshipping this pagan image.
Right. Talking about similarities with Islam, they do correct me if I'm wrong, but I noticed that they really hate Catholics more than non-Christian, like people that are not Christian. And that's something that, between the Sunni Shia divide and Muslims hating other forms of Islam more than non-Muslims, I also noticed, right? So is that true? Because every time I talk to a Jehovah's Witness, not every time, but often, this whole hatred from Catholics.
You almost became one, it sounds like. So I'm talking to an authority.
I should have told the Jehovah's Witnesses that came to my door. I told them I was a devil worshiper. I should have told them I was a Catholic.
Well, it's true and it's not true. That there's obviously many decades of history of Jehovah's Witness literature. And going back to kind of the 1930s and 1940s, when they were really kind of trying to make a name for themselves, one of their biggest gripes was with the Catholic Church. And they were kind of the targets of much of the vitriol in early witness literature. And I grew up with some degree of that, because the Catholics were pointed to as among the early persecutors of Jehovah's Witnesses. They were part of this huge conspiracy to silence Jehovah's Witnesses in the early part of the 20th century, which is when Jesus miraculously chose the Watchtower organization to be his one and only channel of communication. So the Catholics kind of do get a lot of scrutiny, but as the years have gone by, it's kind of less pronounced in witness literature. It's just they just kind of rally against false religion as a whole, rather than a specific religion that they regard as false.
They still do brag about the fact that all Jehovah's Witnesses understand the Bible much better than any other Christian.
They do believe that, but I feel as though I know more about the Bible now as an atheist than I did as a Jehovah's Witness, because I can take the rough with the smooth. I can read passages that we perhaps wouldn't have read as Jehovah's Witnesses and think, well, how does that, make sense?
Yes,
it is astonishing how you actually learn more about the religion once you've actually left.
Yes, true. Same thing with this.
So tell us how did that happen for you? The transition.
So basically, if I can boil it all down, it was moving countries. I'm calling you now from Croatia, and back in 2009, my wife and I decided, for various reasons, that we would moved to Croatia where her parents were. We'd been married for like 2 years. And a lot of my friends were saying, don't do it, Lloyd, don't do it, because you'll grow spiritually weak, because you'll be in a new country with a new language, and it will be harder for you to follow along at the meetings, because witnesses have 2 meetings every week. It's kind of like this constant flow of indoctrination. And I was saying, no, it's going to be fine. I'm going to learn Croatian. I'm going to keep my spirituality. My relationship with Jehovah is really important to me.
So wait, I'm going to make it, I'm sorry to pause. Your wife is Croatian?
Yes.
And she's also Jehovah's Witness?
No longer. She
was when you guys got married?
When we got married, yeah.
Okay.
In fact, it was through the witnesses that I met her. Okay. Because I went to a special school for young single men, and one of the guys on my class was from Croatia and from her congregation. And so we went for a reunion in Croatia, and that's how I met her. Mm-hmm. So I can't be too mad at witnesses from that point of view, because it's because of them that I met my wife. But no, when we moved to Croatia, I was adamant that it wouldn't impact on me, on my beliefs. But the simple truth is that when you start going to the meetings and you don't understand a word of what's being said, it's almost like someone's unplugged, like a source of indoctrination. Suddenly there's space, suddenly there's breathing room to actually think, hang on, what do I actually believe? Never mind what they're telling me I should believe, what are my beliefs? And it was within a matter of, I think, 4 months that I wrote a letter to my wife, because it was such a painful thing for me to admit, saying, I can see myself leaving the religion. And it was many months after that I kind of quit entirely. It was kind of like a gradual process.
How did she respond?
It was a very difficult conversation. It wasn't easy for her, because that was actually one of the kind of lines that she set down when we first met. Was she said, the only reason I can think of why I would stop loving you would be if you stopped loving Jehovah. And of course, that's never going to happen. So when I could sense myself drifting from the religion, I now look back on that period and think, I'm pretty sure, I'm not a mental health expert, but I'm pretty sure I had something close to a nervous breakdown, because I was in floods of tears. It felt like my world was collapsing. I didn't know what was going to happen with my marriage. I didn't want to stay together. I wanted to have kids at some point. She wanted to have kids at some point. Okay, so if we have kids, do we raise them as a Jehovah's Witness? Do we not raise them as a Jehovah's Witness? There were all of these existential issues that I had to deal with all at once, without really knowing what was going to happen, without really knowing whether she was ever going to wake up. I mean, amazingly, she did follow me like a year afterwards. A year after me waking up, she woke up, because I was kind of very tactfully showing what I was learning, because there's so much to learn when you finally start objectively looking at your beliefs. But it by no means is it a given that your wife will follow you. And I hear horror stories all the time of where that doesn't happen, and where there are kids involved, whether there's custody battle, and you name it. So that's essentially how I woke up.
Yeah, I think that's part of the snare that keeps people there, because you're so entangled. It's not just you, but it's you and your mother and your father and your wife and your kids and your, like everybody in your life and your community, your friends. I mean, these are people that you grow up with, seeing them twice a week, every day. And so to leave the religion is more than just, walking away from this ideology because you disagree with it. It's always so much deeper and terrifying than that.
And in most religions, the whole, I'm sure it's still difficult to walk away, but you're at least thinking, if I walk away, I'm still going to be friends with everyone. I'm still going to, be able to talk to my mum and dad, or to my sister and brother, and blah, blah, blah. But with witnesses, and I'm fairly certain with a lot of Muslims as well, you know that you're going to be shunned. You know that it's going to turn your whole world upside down, and that people who you've spent years investing in emotionally and loving and caring for, and then caring about you, suddenly they're out of your life. The shunning really does keep people captive, because it basically presents all of the mental and emotional barriers, so that you don't even want to start doubting your beliefs because you're afraid of where that will take you.
They do a very good job at that shunning thing. It's very aggressive, and especially if your entire community and social network and your friends and your family, if it's all within the Jehovah's Witnesses, then, it's not just about just losing some friends. It's about losing all your friends, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they're told that there's a lot of propaganda that kind of really drives home the extent to which shunning is to be carried out. So, for example, there was a Watchtower article in 2013 that said, "Don't even email a disfellowshipped loved one." And it's a series of conversions in 2016. Witnesses were shown a video of that was intended to show how thoroughly parents should shun their child if the child becomes disfellowshipped. And you actually see the daughter in tears on her phone trying to call parents, and the parents have their cell phone on the kitchen worktop, and you can see it's ringing, and they glance at it and they can see who's calling, and they refuse to pick up the phone. Now, anything, and that's actually in a highly polished kind of video that was shown to millions of Jehovah's Witnesses at their conventions. And anything could have been happening to that girl when she was calling her parents. Anything could, you name it, but they aren't allowed to pick up the phone if they know it's her.
What the fuck? This is why religion is not going against like nature. Like, anything that could separate a mom or a father from their child like that is pure evil.
Yeah.
I mean,
now that I'm a father, I especially kind of struggle to understand how this paternal bond can be so easily broken, because my mother's now died. She died while I was still a witness, but my dad made it clear that when I was disassociating as a witness, he said, "Well, once you've disassociated, I will be shunning you."
And did he?
Oh yeah, and to the point that he hasn't met his granddaughter yet. He hasn't met my daughter.
It's like my mom too. She hasn't met my granddaughter.
I can imagine, yeah. We actually went to his house once, and it was one of those things where I put a note through the door. I won't go into all the details, but I basically said, "Listen, I'm coming round. We will be arriving tomorrow morning, and see you there." And basically, he left a key for us to get into the house. Well, he wasn't in the house. And while we were there, because I was doing some work on the garden, he was circling around in his car to see whether we were still there or not. And only once we'd left did he come home. But it was his first opportunity to meet his granddaughter, my daughter Jessica. And he couldn't bring himself to just stop the car and get out and in his own house see his granddaughter. The only knowledge that Jessica has of her granddad is the photograph that we have in our front room. And every now and then we'll say, "That's Daddy's dad." But
there is precedent in the Bible for this, isn't there? Like, doesn't Jesus say, I didn't come to bring peace on earth. I came up to bring, like, you should love me more than a father loves his son, more than a mother loves her daughter. Like any.
Well, it's like with lots of religions, you can find almost any verse to support almost any position in the Bible. But what's ironic with witnesses, they haven't always shunned. They only started shunning, or they started disfellowshipping in 1952. And even then, it wasn't until 1981 that they made it so that you can't even leave gracefully. They said, well, if you're going to disassociate yourself, which is what I did on conscientious grounds, you should be treated the same as someone who is disfellowshipped for sin. And that only changed in 1981. So for witnesses who say, "Oh, well, it's in the Bible. We're doing this because it's in the Bible." Well, it's only in the Bible from 1952 onwards, and it was only from 1981 onwards that you weren't allowed to leave gracefully, which is all I wanted to do.
Right. That's one dangerous thing with religious texts, isn't it? That it's vague enough for you to just basically to be able to justify anything you want. It's not, people are always looking at it like, well, does it say this or does it say that? It doesn't, that lack of clarity is actually what gives it the power for you to be able to use it for whatever, like justify anything. That's what
you could say anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it's exactly the same issue with Islam.
Yeah, it is. Well, they take it a step further, of course. If you leave, you're to be killed. So
yeah,
there's that. They'll both happen. I mean, if you're in a country where it's, out of the 13 countries, I think, that are atheists, are like, they get the death penalty. But if you're not in one of those countries, there's other things that happen, and definitely ostracization, socially is very common. My family not having anything to do with me, not wanting to speak to me is a blessing. It's better than them wanting to find me and kill me. So I'm happy to have them not talk to me.
It is better, but I think that maybe the shunning is more effective, because I think like if the government is wanting to kill me for me changing my opinion, I might be like, well, what are you trying to hide, right? But if my parents and my family and my friends will look down upon me because of this, that's a more psychological.
But both happen, Armin.
No, I'm saying, I'm saying both happen in Islam, but I'm just saying that shunning of it is more powerful, maybe, in keeping you in line.
I know I've spoken to, you guys have heard of Imtiaz Shams.
Mm-hmm.
He and I did a video together where we talked about this, and his feeling was that the emotional side of things and the ostracization in some ways is harder than the physical threat. When it's your own flesh and blood turning on you, in some ways it makes you not want to live. I mean, there's people who, you hear anecdotes of people committing suicide because they can't handle we're social creatures, aren't we? We crave interaction with others. We need that sense of community.
They know that. That's why it's built in there. That's why it works so well, right? Whereas Hasidic Jews go through the same thing, because it's such a tight-knit community that once you leave it, you really feel like the sense of loneliness cannot be described to anybody else. Like, you have to have gone through that to know, like, to feel utterly and completely alone. And then to not even have your imaginary friend in the sky anymore either. So there's literally nobody but yourself.
And how do you just kind of pull someone to one side who's never been through it and doesn't know the religion and explain it all to them without looking like a complete wide-eyed lunatic? That's issue as well.
Hi, dude. It's Ali. I joined late today.
Hi, Ali.
But hi, how's it going? So I've been listening to this for a little bit, but it actually reminded me of with ex-Muslims in the U.S. and how I went to an Eid party once. And the Eid is a celebration that Muslims have. It's like a Muslim Christmas. And it was a whole bunch of ex-Muslims who had been disowned by their families for leaving the faith. And they were there, but they were celebrating on Eid, and they had sort of pork and bacon and all of the food products. Like, this was a South Asian thing, so they had biryani and they had halim, all these like dishes, but they were made out of pork. It was pretty disgusting. But they were acting out. So it was in reaction to Islamic taboos, dietary taboos. The way they were dressed was in reaction to Islamic dress restrictions. And it was happening on the holiday of Eid when families get together. Now they kind of formed their own family. So just by looking at what they were reacting to showed that there still was some sort of association that they had with that they felt that sense of loss. So even though their attempt was to try to get completely away from it, just by doing that stuff, they were sort of betraying a kind of connection to it in the first place. That's where I think the identity comes in. One of the most sinister things and evil things about religion, I think, is that it's so integrated with your identity. If someone tells you they don't believe in gravity, you're like, okay, you don't believe in gravity. Good for you. Where if someone says, I don't believe in Islam anymore, then suddenly, people, there's an emotional reaction as well as just an intellectual disagreement. So that's one thing that's really it's really sinister. It's really unfortunate. And I think that that's common not only with Muslims, but whatever. Yeah, you don't have the death sentence here in the U.S. necessarily. There is more risk of being killed for ex-Muslims, but that emotional personal identity crisis, I think, goes through all of the fundamentalist Christians or anybody who had a very strong identity to their faith and their family.
People don't like the idea that their personality was defined for them for so long, and that their lives were micromanaged for so long. I mean, witnesses even have an expression, the new personality, put on the new personality, which is based on a scripture in the New Testament. And this is supposed to be where you literally change your personality to conform to what the faithful slave or the governing body is telling you to do. So yeah, it's bound to be an issue when you realize that you were lied to for years. To think, oh my word, how did I allow these people to micromanage my life to such a ridiculous degree? And yeah, you do get acting out to some extent as well with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses.
So you have a lot of people, a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses that contact you now, and you've sort of, do you guys have like a support system where you help each other out and help people that are coming out of the organization, or?
I wish I could say yes. It's kind of my dream to have like a really nice kind of support system set up. The simple truth is that for me, I can only do so many things, and I can only kind of put out the resources that I'm putting out. The kind of aftercare side of things, to some degree, I have to rely on people to figure it out. I am actually writing a book at the moment called How to Escape from Jehovah's Witnesses, with some just basic advice for what to do when you're going through that process, because it can be such a minefield of, what do you say to others? What are others trying to get from you when they contact you, and all of those kind of things. But in terms of support, there are obviously online groups. There's a large Reddit community. There are Facebook groups. And it's basically a kind of do-it-yourself job where people kind of just come together and just through simply telling their stories and showing solidarity to each other, they're able to kind of somehow muddle through. But my dream is for there to be a kind of more programmed approach to it, where we can hold people's hand a little bit more, because I do get inundated with emails from very, very emotional emails, by the way. That are very kind of heart-wrenching to read. And I feel guilty for not having the time to reply to them. But I just have to content myself with knowing that if I was to reply to them all, I wouldn't be able to produce the content that's initiated the email in the first place. So there's literally just too much work to do.
That's what prompted me to start the Free Hearts, Free Minds thing that I'm doing, which is basically when they contact me, I get them in contact with a ex-Muslim life coach who is trained to respond to their questions and to help them through the process in a way that I'm not, because I was trying to answer everybody as much as I could. But what ends up happening is once you answer somebody, then you're invested in them too. And so you want to know, like, are you okay? Did you do that? How did it work out? And then you're doing that with, X number of people. It's just not feasible. You can't continue your life like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of collaboration involved, and it's something I'm kind of slowly working towards. But one thing we do have as well is a survey. So one of the first acts of activism was to set up jwsurvey.org, and on that we have an online survey where people can basically answer questions and indicate what their beliefs are. And we have around 4,000 or 5,000 people a year taking part in that, and there's a cathartic element to it as well, of course, because you're kind of asserting on a form what your beliefs are, and just that process of saying, yes, this is what I believe. Some people have found it helpful, but yeah, I'd really like this to be more of a one-on-one kind of approach. That would be fantastic.
That's kind of where we're at with ex-Muslims too, or exactly the way you described it. I think the only organization that I've ever seen that can do it step by step by holding somebody's hand is a organization called Footsteps, which helps people who are leaving the Hasidic Jewish community. And that's because they really, even though they are in New York, of all places, a lot of them they're not even literate because they've been going to these, schools and everything. Like they're in such a tight knit bubble.
Yeah. I watched it in One of Us, the documentary.
That's right. Yeah.
It's astonishing. I was actually angry watching it. I could obviously relate to so much of it from my own experience, but there are elements of the Hasidic Jewish movement, for want of a better word, that are definitely worse than Jehovah's Witnesses. And I found myself feeling at times, especially the way they kind of had they were so embroiled in the legal system, and there was that level of corruption.
Yeah, that was scary.
That was something unfamiliar to me. You don't really have that problem with Jehovah's Witnesses. You get a fair trial.
That's what it's like in Islamic countries, in the about 60 of them. That's what it's like over there. There's really nowhere you can go. There's no escape. But to hear of it happening in a secular country to that extent was actually really surprising to me.
And a big wake-up call as to how undereducated our governments are when it comes to these groups that are literally among us and exerting, medieval standards on a 21st century, populace. It's astonishing.
Like the blood transfusion, right? Like that's a huge problem, right? Because apparently accepting blood for them is like eating blood, which is they consider it because it's sin to eat blood, and they think that if you accept blood from somebody else, you're technically eating it. Is that correct? Is that how they see it?
Not just from somebody else, even your own blood. Even if your own blood leaves your body and then is transfused into you, that too is against teachings.
So you don't drink the blood of Christ then?
No, I've never knowingly done that, actually.
You don't do the cracker and wine thing?
But no, that is that's actually a teaching that there's been some attempts at trying to understand what the death toll is from that teaching alone, because it's been enforced since 1945. We're again talking about something where witnesses just were trying to think, almost like they were trying to think of some way that they could stand out. And in 1945, they said, well, we've decided that we can no longer accept blood transfusions. And it's very difficult to get to know exactly how many people have died as a result of that, because it's getting hard for filtering through of someone who's died. But it's difficult to know the full death toll. But one thing, just by kind of doing a few extrapolations of medical studies, it's easy to come up with a picture of tens of thousands who've died as a result. And obviously, if a cult today were to suddenly claim tens of thousands of lives, well, there would be outrage. People would be, well, how do we address this? What do we do? What laws do we introduce? But because it's a mainstream group like Jehovah's Witnesses, and because there aren't any firm statistics, it all just gets ignored.
And because it's a religion.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah. So I had, when we were in medical school, we had this thing. It specifically told us that Jehovah's Witnesses may not accept life-saving blood transfusions, but when it comes to children, if they refuse it for their children, then the government has the authority to step in and force the child to receive blood if it's a life-saving blood transfusion. So have you ever come across anything like that and seen how parents react, or do they sort of preempt it by what do they do in that kind of situation?
I've never come across it personally when I was in the movement, but since leaving, I'm obviously more in tune with news stories and stories where the court has intervened. And you almost get the feeling that, in a way, the parents are relieved, because they kind of have to put up this display of, no, this is what we want to happen, and anything that you force on us is out of our hands. And in a way, they're relieved when the court steps in and says, no, actually, this is out of your hands. We're saving your child. At least then they can put their hands up and say, well, we did everything we could to kill our child for our beliefs.
So they want the children to live, but they're putting it but even if they want their child to live, they're putting their own children's lives at risk because of their belief system.
That's what's so perverted. You would think that if it's a child, they get a free pass because they've not. How can they possibly know how they feel about some command in the Bible that's really to eating blood, to do with how it's medical use, because they weren't transfusing blood in first century Palestine. But the way that this is applied even to children, so that children die. And in my book, I give a few examples from witness literature. We're talking about where Watchtower literature is literally boasting about killing children. And I give a few of those examples in my book.
That's amazing. I think. How does it differ from, or are there any parallels with Christian scientists? Because Christian scientists, they go beyond that. They don't even give kids medication or antibiotics. And I know this because I'm a big Metallica fan, and James Hetfield, the singer, actually came from a Christian Science family. And I remember as a kid reading about how, he said his parents never gave him antibiotics or anything because they were Christian scientists. So is that a more extreme position, or do you know anything about it? Or?
I don't know much about Christian scientists. No, I'll stick to what I know, but they do. But witnesses do antibiotics on. I'm not aware of witnesses being against even vaccines. I mean, probably there are individual witness families who have issues with vaccines, but on a whole, there isn't a prohibition against modern medical practices. It's literally just blood transfusions that they have an issue with.
Why do they have life so difficult for themselves? Why are they why do you think they come up with these rules out of nowhere?
It's a religion. That's why.
Yeah, it's control. It's a way of saying, well, we're different. Hey, one of the reasons why we're going to be saved and 7 billion people are going to be massacred at Armageddon is because we're trying to do it right, and we're trying to observe the Bible to the letter and do everything literally.
It's funny that an ex-Muslim is asking you, why did they just come up with these difficult rules?
Come on, you guys know this.
And the thing is, actually, the answer is usually less. When people actually investigate the reasoning behind it, it is rarely that stupid. There is some tactical, it could be another loyalty test, right? It's crazy and it's dangerous and it's harmful, but it's not random. But most of the time, it has a purpose behind it somewhere. Usually, not always, right?
But sometimes it is just circumcision in Jewish history it started as a loyalty test. I mean, you had Abraham's sacrifice of his son. He almost cut off his head, and then God's like, no, don't cut off the big head. You can cut off the little head. And then he started doing the little head thing.
That's mythology, Ellie, but the real...
in towns, then the rabbis who were in the heads of these small towns, they would actually it was a way for people in the town, men, to pledge allegiance by taking their sons and cutting off their foreskins.
There you go. It had a purpose. It wasn't just random.
Yeah, it was a purpose. Yeah,
but the purpose here was that it's eating blood. That's what it is.
Excuse. The purpose.
But it doesn't. When you're religious, I think that
there's no difference between purpose and excuse.
Yeah.
There is. No. The excuse is what you tell your followers, but the goal is something else. The goal is to see if they actually do it, right? Mm. The goal is to see if they actually will stay in line. This is how you define who's in your group and who's outside your group.
I think a lot of this has to do with when you're dealing with religion, you're dealing with a spiritual world that is outside of the material world. So if you can give up something that the material world does and still survive and still make it, we can survive without blood transfusions because God's going to save us. We don't give our kid antibiotics because God's going to help us, and things that then it just sort of makes you more, I guess, authentic in that sense. And for some reason, it's always to the kids. It's the ultimate test. Do this to your kids.
Yes.
And give your daughter to the prophet. She's 53 years old. She's 9 years old.
Point, Ali. Even from Abrahamic religion, started with Abraham killing his own son. It always the greatest
child sacrifice. Yeah.
The greatest of all loyalty tests is to sacrifice the greatest thing you love, and it's usually your own child.
Yeah.
when you brought up the idea of the government stepping in and giving the blood transfusion to the kids, and so the parents kind of put their hands up and say, "There's nothing I can do about that." That's how I feel about the, quote unquote burqa ban. So when it's against the law for a woman to wear niqab to cover her face, I am absolutely positive, as a woman that wore a niqab, a lot of those women are like, whew, all right, sorry, government says I can't wear it. It's not me. I have no control. And then they get to have that freedom, right? In the same way that these parents are going to be happy that their child gets to live, but they wouldn't have the strength of, all of the things that we were talking about before. It would mean being completely, I can't remember what the term is you guys use for when they're shunned from the group and all that stuff. Like, they don't want that to happen, but they also don't want their child to die. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I'd like to think that most of these parents would be willing to leave the church so that their child can live. But knowing my parents and the way you described your dad, and knowing hundreds of thousands of stories that I've heard, probably there'd be a lot of kids that would die if the government didn't step in.
It's very useful to have a shifting of responsibility so that you can say it's nothing to do with me. But right. I just remember when I was a witness, it was just one of those things where you were aware that if you were in that situation, if you were ever a parent and your child needed a blood transfusion, that's the stand that you would need to take an abstract thing where you knew that was what you should do and what you had to do, but you kind of knew deep down that actually being in that situation would probably be something very different. And it's interesting how on my survey, one of the questions that we ask those taking our survey, because we make allowances for people to be taking the survey as believing Jehovah's Witnesses. And one of those questions is, would you allow your child to die rather than receive a blood transfusion? And there is always a percentage that says yes. Oof. So there is always a percentage of people taking the survey. Yeah.
I mean, it's like, and what it does to everybody else is that even if you don't have officially any kind of doctrine, people are just much more tolerant of kids being exploited in these religious communities. Like if you look at any of these Roy Moore videos, the guy in Alabama who ran for the Senate, he's always talking about God and the faithful and God's on our side and all this. And I can't help thinking that if he actually had a consensual relationship with an adult male and he was in a gay sex scandal, or even if he was accused of it, he would be done. But because it was child molestation and it was a girl and he's an older man, it's like big deal. That's what God did to Mary, It's Muhammad did to Aisha. It's amazing that it's not just a matter of, even if they don't directly do these things to kids, they're just so much more tolerant of a child sacrifice in a way. I mean, it's a modern version of it.
A lot of it is brainwashing too, because a lot of Muslims, if you ask them, should gay people be killed? Would you kill your child if they left Islam? All of these things that they know are Islamic rules, but they wouldn't want to act on those rules. But if they got asked in a survey, they'd probably answer in the affirmative because they've never actually had to deal with it. Like, for example, all my life I heard about jihad, and all my life I heard about dying in the name of Allah, and that's what you're supposed to do, and that's the best people, et cetera, et cetera. And when I married my ex, I knew that he had been in Afghanistan. I knew he had been involved in jihad, but all of that stuff was theoretical to me. It wasn't until he started to talk about my daughter, he started talking about her dying in the name of Allah. That's when it all of a sudden became real to me. Before that, it was just rhetoric. It was just, mindless, repetitive jargon that you just say when you're praying all the time. But it just became real when he was talking about my daughter all of a sudden. So I think that, I don't know if I'm giving them the benefit. I think it's true. I really do believe that people are innately good. Most people are. And even though they say these things and they regurgitate these things, I think when it comes down to it, I want to believe that they wouldn't actually do that. They wouldn't action these rules that they that they say they believe in.
Well, if you look at some of these surveys, even from Pakistan, if you look at it from about 10, 15 years ago, when they asked them, is it okay to kill innocent people who are infidels or apostates? They all, about 40-something% said yes. I can't remember the exact number. It was around there. But the most recent version of that survey is only 3%. And that's after ISIS and Al-Qaeda came and started killing other Muslims. They started killing them because they thought they weren't Muslim enough. Now they're like, holy shit, it's us. Right? And now they can empathize with it, and it actually hits home. And that's why there's an issue with these surveys, and I've said this before, is that even people in my extended family and my distant relatives, and if you talk to them theoretically, if someone came up in the survey and they said, should apostates be killed, they'd say yes, they should be killed. And then when you ask him about me, I'd be like, no, not him. He's different. He's a nice guy. So it's these things are much more complicated. Again, it's
Having said that, of course, there are thousands of honor killings going on every year, so it does happen. It's not that it doesn't happen, but I'd like to believe that it's a lot smaller percentage than the people that just mindlessly.
It's a small fraction of a big population, so it makes it a big number.
Yeah,
exactly.
You're right.
That's what the problem is.
Yeah.
The problem with religion is that these people exist, but they didn't have, they would have, this kind of people that would do these things exist with or without religion. It's just religion that gives them the excuse and the cover and the protection they need to carry it out.
See, I don't know. I hear that argument all the time, but again, I hate talking about him, but I'm going to bring up my jihadi ex again and say that he was not actually, he did evil things, but he really felt like he was doing it for good.
Right.
He's a simple-minded person, and I think a lot of these guys are simple, and it's such a simple ideology.
But I think that's what Armin's saying.
No, she's correcting me. There's two types of it. There's bad people that now get an excuse, and now there's also other group of people that are good people that think that they're doing good. So
I've kind of moved around on this a little bit recently. For the most part, I am a very strong advocate for the existence of mind control and the ease with which high control groups can kind of literally almost reprogram you to make you things you ordinarily wouldn't dream of doing, such as shunning, such as letting your child die for want of a blood transfusion, etc., etc. What made me change it slightly on that was when I heard about some of the stuff that ISIS has been getting up to. And I heard a story where maybe you guys are familiar with it, where I think it was a Yazidi woman they took captive, and they took the child captive, and they killed the child and fed it to the mother without her knowing.
Oh my God! I couldn't even read that story. I was just.
Exactly. It's the sort of thing that kind of you resent almost having that information thrown at you. But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, surely it doesn't say that in any interpretation of the Quran. Surely you need to be a very, very messed up person to do that.
What was the story again?
Oh man, you say it. I'm not saying it. It's so funny.
ISIS making a Yazidi woman eat her own child by not telling her that they'd killed the child and then prepared it as a meal for her after starving her. By the way, I think that there's indoctrination and there's mind control and there's brainwashing, but then to be able to do that when it's not telling you in the Quran, well, this is what you need to do.
Okay, so this is the thing. I got to mention this. These groups, if you think of ISIS, they are a group of misfits. These men they don't belong in their communities. They don't belong in their societies. They've probably been bullied as they were growing up. They probably have, mental difficulties. They have learning difficulties. They're not the cream of the crop, right? And because they have nowhere to fit in, they find each other and they fit in with each other. So think of it like a gang or something in the streets of, some horrible place where the kids really don't have any other options except for to join a gang, grab a gun, and start selling drugs or whatever it is, and then they get into this community. So that group are all a bunch of people that are fucked up. And when you get a group of fucked up people all together supporting each other, you're going to come up with crazy things, and they're all going to support each other in it because of the brotherhood is so tight.
Right.
And no, you're right. That isn't something that comes out of anything Islamic, but they do believe that the Yazidis are devil worshippers, and they do believe that anything that they do to them is fine. So they are going to come up with the most crazy things.
Well, there is something about.
Can I respond to this? I mean, I think the more is Yazid. Okay, so I think the more the ones that are really following Islam, they don't really think that you could do anything to them. You're supposed to kill them, enslave them. But the ones that are really pious, they want to make sure that whatever they do is supported by some sort of hadith. But again, I think there's different groups of them. They're not all the same. The thing is that religion is always a harmful factor in all groups of them. But I think you do have these groups of people that are misfits or are just psychopaths. Maybe they're not even, they didn't even have a bad life. They just enjoy that kind of lifestyle where they get to do these things, and this appeal to them. And you also have this group of people that feel that they want to belong to something. They're not bad people, and they want to belong to this brotherhood, and this is their calling, and they're
not going to say anything if these guys are doing these horrible things because they're just so happy to be part of a group. Like if you look at all of the, even Al Capone and stuff like that, they did some horrible things too. But not all of them did, of course. A lot of them were just stood idly by quietly because they wanted to be part of the group. But yeah, those kinds of those kinds of just horrible people together, it breeds another layer.
Because what you have probably the same in Islam is you have compulsory friendship. So that once you're in the group, you have to be friends with everyone who's also in that group. You don't have the choice. And that's perfect for, like you say, misfits and people who are anti-spiritual, people who wouldn't stand the chance of making friends in normal society. Hey, here's this reservoir of people who have to be your friend, whether they like you or not. And yeah, it does attract that kind of caliber of person. So yeah, I can see that being some way of explaining people doing these sorts of things.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if some ISIS member looked at some other ISIS members doing something and they thought like, well, that's not Islamic. But then they justify it by saying, well, it doesn't matter because he's a Muslim and he's going to be forgiven. Like he's sinning right now. He's not following Sunnah accurately, but he's a Muslim. That woman is a Yazidi, so she's going to go to hell. He might have to pay a price for not following Sunnah accurately, but eventually he's going to end up in heaven, right?
Yeah, I think that's the main point. I think the biggest thing with when you zoom out of it, the biggest thing with religion is the whole in-group, out-group thing.
Yeah.
Like, we're the right ones. The other people are barely even human. So you look at others or the outsider as pretty much not even human. And once you do that, then it allows you to do all kinds of horrible things to them, especially if you feel like you're under attack. You're like, well, these people, they're doing this to us, or they're screwing up our faith, they're insulting our prophet by not believing in them, whatever it is, justification they give. The point is that, sometimes people do it because they follow Islam. There are good people who actually think they're doing good things with all this jihadist violence. Then there's other people who just are very violence prone and they're psychopathic, like you said, Yaz, and they come in but for some reason, the religion, the Islam actually gives them a sense of, okay, now I can sort of even loosely justify this as something that is righteous, and it gives them that. So either way, the Islam part of it is a key player, and it helps justify it. And these groups, when you're talking about wanting to belong, we're talking about how the ideology is so integrated with the identity aspect, and wanting to belong with a group is an identity-driven thing. You want an identity, and that's one thing that religion does provide. It doesn't provide any evidence or any evidence-based sense of morality. But so it's pretty much it's open season for all. anything that you want to fit into it, because you don't necessarily have to provide any reasoning behind it.
Yeah, it's kind of like when the Republicans when the Democrats start doing molesting women, they start pointing it out. But when a Republican does it, they protect it because this is our child molester. We have to, it's different from other child molesters. It's in our group. It's in our tribe. We have to protect him, right? So
look at Christendom in the Middle Ages, like in Europe, in the pretty much a lot of the 20th century for hundreds of years. There aren't a lot of things in the New Testament that necessarily support all of that violence and the torture and the Inquisition and everything they did to the Jews and non-Christians and trying to get people to convert and burning witches and throwing homosexuals into fires, burning them. Like a lot of this stuff, some of it's supported in the Old Testament, but a lot of it wasn't. But
even
that whole in-group
nowhere in the Bible.
dynamic did it. Sorry, what are you saying?
Even going to church is nowhere in the Bible. Does anywhere in the Bible say that you have to go to church on Sundays? No.
Oh, yeah.
Do not forsake the gathering of yourselves together as some have a custom. That's what we were told.
Yeah, if you don't gather together. That could mean so many things. I don't know. Yeah. The Jehovah's Witnesses, when they meet with you, they you have no idea. There's so many prophecies. Let me explain it to you. You will believe right away. And then they have like this, the statues, the feet is bronze. This means that kingdom. The head is gold. This means that kingdom. We're like, where are you getting this from? It's just talking about a fucking statue. Like, prophecy my ass.
Yeah. So I guess the last question for you, Nude, just like, is there anything about being, that you thought that was good that you missed or that you've retained from that life in the Jehovah's Witness, apart from Prince and his music? Because I know he was Jehovah's Witness and he was a fucking genius. But is there anything that you still feel like, okay, I've gotten rid of the faith, I'm done with it, but this part of it I thought was good?
Yeah, if I could go back in a time machine and put myself out of being in a cult, I wouldn't do it. And that is not the same answer you'll get from probably the majority of ex-witnesses. Probably the majority would say, yes, I'll get myself the hell out of it because it screwed me up. This did screw me up, but in my own particular instance, and I think you guys may relate to this, it's put me in a position where I know something about something that not lots of people know about. And I'm in a to use my skills and my whatever talents I have to kind of draw awareness to this, where perhaps not enough people are drawing awareness to it. So I try and, as much as possible, take a negative and turn it into a positive and say, this has happened to me. Here's how I'm going to make the world a better place because this really sucky thing happened to me. And I think that's what you guys are doing as well. So.
Oh, that's great. I love that. That's a perfect way to end our podcast.
Yeah, that's great.
And I hope that you have a very, very Merry Christmas. Do you celebrate Christmas on steroids?
I do now. I do now, yeah. Well, we were talking about acting out before, so yeah.
So you can't celebrate, as Jehovah, you can't celebrate Christmas, birthdays, anything like that. Just death days apparently are important, right?
No, it's like Wahhabism.
You can have a funeral, yeah. And you can have a wedding anniversary, but that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, can you mention the name of the book that you're going to write so people look out for it?
So my current book, which you can buy now on Amazon, it's called The Reluctant Apostate. And that explains my story and the history of Jehovah's Witnesses. And the book I'm going to be releasing shortly is called How to Escape from Jehovah's Witnesses.
All right. And when can people find you if they want to follow you on Twitter, Facebook, or anywhere?
I'm on Twitter. I think it's Cedars JW Survey is my Twitter handle. Yasmin and I follow each other, so you'll find me through her probably.
Yeah. And we'll put the links in the description for anyone interested who wants to follow Lloyd. Then you can find his Twitter there and his YouTube, and we'll write the names of his books as well. The Reluctant Apostate. I love that title. That's really interesting. That would make me want to pick that up because I think that really describes a lot of us. We're like, God, really?
Yeah.
Do I really have to not believe? Like, this is ruining everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would also mention that the friendly atheist Hemant Mehta wrote the foreword for your book, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Correct.
it's got a really nice looking cover. So, I mean, that's a pretty huge endorsement. I'm a huge fan of Hemant, and he's a great guy.
Me too.
Yeah, congratulations on that. We're looking forward to your book. I'm definitely going to read this.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again for coming on, Lloyd. Hope you have a good morning because your night's over.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to bed now. But
Thank you.
please keep up the fantastic work.
Thank you. And
thank you. You too.
Thanks. Good night.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the gracious support of the Illuminati and the great state of Israel. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. In the meantime, we greatly appreciate the support of our current donors. Please consider supporting by sharing the podcast with your fellow heathens or by donating at patreon.com/SJME.